Hello, Man in Gray here with another episode of Reading the 20th Century. This is a book series where I focus on one book from each year of the 20th century. And this week's book is The Late Great Planet Earth by Hal Lindsey, which was published in 1970 and eventually became one of the biggest selling books of the 1970s, although its publisher, Bantam Books, didn't promote that because they feared opposition from people who disagreed with Lindsey's ideas. Now, before I talk about the book, I want to apologize for being away so long, but last week I had a major life-changing event. I was driving down a parking lot when I suffered a stroke, blacked out, and drove my car into a light pole. And I woke up 3 days later in the intensive care ward of a hospital, not knowing anything that had happened to me. And then shortly after that, I had brain surgery. And in the future, I'm going to have radiation therapy as well. So, been through a lot, but I'm quite lucky to have survived. And I am still very weak and shaky with my balance, and my brain isn't functioning as rapidly as it was in the past. But I think with a few weeks of rest, my brain will heal from the trauma. I want to thank my team of doctors and my wife and daughter for all the help they gave me over the last few weeks. It's the reason I'm here. So I will continue to do this series, but not as often as I have in the past. All right. 1970 was one of the peak years of the Cold War. A majority of people around the world were absolutely convinced that there was going to be a nuclear war between America and the Soviet Union. In fact, that was one of the major plot points of the Star Trek TV series, which takes place after the Earth is destroyed by a nuclear war. And a few years before the book came out, Israel attacked Egypt and a number of Arab countries in a war that lasted 6 days and completely devastated them. So there was already fear about another war breaking out in the Middle East. So the time was ripe for this kind of book. Now, Hal Lindsey was a Coast Guard sailor during the Korean War, and afterwards he attended the Dallas Theological Seminary, where he became absolutely obsessed with the book of Revelation. But he took a different approach to the prophecies in the book of Revelation than a lot of people did. He didn't think they dealt with distant past or events in the far future. He thought they referred to contemporary events that were coming up soon. For example, the beast with 10 horns he thought of as the common market, a European economic trade agreement, which he thought would eventually take over Europe and be run by the Antichrist. He also thought Gog, the country called Gog in the book of Revelation, was the Soviet Union, and Magog was Israel. Under Lindsey's scenario, Egypt attacks Israel, and the United States intervenes to save Israel, and then the Russians get involved, and the whole thing escalates into a nuclear war. But then Jesus shows up and ends the war and declares 1,000 years of peace for his followers. Now, what's interesting about The Late Great Planet Earth is every single prediction in the book, every single one turned out to be wrong. The common market didn't take over Europe, and it didn't have 10 countries in it for very long. Israel defeated, every time they fought a war, Israel defeated the Arab countries. They were never in any danger. And the Russians and the Americans, every time a war happened, cooperated to make sure that the war didn't escalate into a nuclear war. And of course, Jesus didn't come back from the grave. He didn't come back from heaven or whatever and take over. But nevertheless, this book became extremely popular. It sold steadily throughout the 1970s. Now, one of the things about this is that Lindsey was an evangelical premillennialist, which at the time, that group of people were kind of at the bottom of the status among religious groups. And so he was telling them that eventually there was going to be a war, but everything would work out and they would be the heroes. Jesus would set up 1,000-year paradise with them at the helm. So it was a very intriguing idea. And of course, there were some people that thought that because this was supposedly based on biblical prophecy, it had to be true. And he had a big influence politically because Lindsey was a big supporter of Israel. And there are some people who believe that Ronald Reagan was influenced by this book in his political campaign for president in 1970 because he also became a big supporter of Israel. Now, the book continued to sell during the 70s despite nothing being true, none of it happening. And he lived for another 52 years, never really reputed what he said. He continued to write books from time to time using biblical prophecy as a prediction of the future, and every one of them turned out to be wrong. But it didn't matter to his followers. He had a following on the Trinity TV network. He appeared there occasionally as a speaker. And although traditional theologians considered him to be a little more than a crackpot, he had a following among his millennial fans. And he had an influence politically with the Christian right. And even now, over 50 years later, the book is still in print, even though the political winds have completely changed. The common market no longer exists. Instead, there's the European Union. The Cold War is long since over. Israel is in its strongest position militarily in its history, and it's made peace with a number of countries. So the situation in the early 1970s completely changed from now. But the book still is intriguing to some people. Lindsey wrote in a kind of in-your-face style. He was a very, very dynamic writer, and he caught people's attention. And he was, a member of the premillennial group of apoplectic people, and still has an influence today, all these years later. The book is The Late Great Planet Earth. The author is Hal Lindsey, and the year was 1970. I'll be back again in a few weeks with another book. Thanks for watching.